Hello and welcome back to the first episode of the new season of The Tigers Down Under. I'm Alex, your host as always, and with me I have Brad.
Good evening.
It's a first episode of the season. There's a bit that's happened over the off season since our last episode that we recorded about a month or so ago with Dan. Unfortunately, we'll start with the bad news first, I guess, and the departures in the managerial front, with Nigel Adkins declaring over a statement that a statement that he released on Twitter that unfortunately he wasn't able to renew his contract with the club. And importantly, he said our futures are not aligned, and that was sort of the red flag for me in what he was saying. And um, I guess it was always a situation I was looking at quite closely where Adkins has sort of said he was quite happy to stay at the club as long as he could see some sort of path, some sort of planning towards an eventual promotion push. He didn't care about throwing millions of pounds at players. He just wanted to see some sort of recruitment plan, recruitment strategy, some sort of budget, some sort of plan to progress to the Premier League. And the fact that he clearly couldn't see that if he's not signed a new contract is a bit of a concern.
You're not wrong. And in fact, I probably didn't realise until we started talking previous to the show that Adkins has actually coached us now for quite a few games compared to obviously his two or three predecessors, which is nothing short of remarkable, really, considering the owners at the time. But it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that all the things we hear bumbling away around players' contracts and where the future lies and transfer funds and all these sorts of things are just, we hit the same brick wall. It doesn't matter whether it's managers or players. They're pretty hard to rock up to work if you don't know whether the club's really going to be the same in a month or 6 months' time.
Yeah, and I guess the interesting thing or the very telling thing, I guess, with Adkins as well is it's not as if he's just walked into another job, in the sense that it's not as if a club was in his ear and sort of talking him out of a new deal with us to go and sign for them. So, for instance, when Lampard left Derby, I thought that Adkins could be quite a logical sort of replacement for them at Derby, but he hasn't gone into a job straight away. And so it sort of suggests that, well, in a way, very similar to when Bruce left us on the cusp of a Premier League campaign. And you think, well, this guy's walked away from in Bruce's case, a Premier League job, in Adkins' case, a Championship job, with nothing actually lined up. And that actually gives a bit of insight into just how poor the working conditions must have been, or just how unaligned, to use Adkins' term, the vision was between the owners and the manager to sort of walk away from that job and not feel like you're going to be given a fair go at it.
Yeah, and look, probably to be fair to Adkins, he's probably actually got the fibre we were all questioning about when he
Yeah.
first joined us. Is he really a guy who can make a tough call, or is he a guy hanging on to, what could be one of his last managerial jobs or whatever it was? But in the end, he's walked away because probably everything he was promised from the minute he first got to the club never eventuated. And I mean, let's face it, he would know what the future of Marshall and Campbell and these guys was probably going to look like because he would have probably already been privy to the contracts that would have been offered.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's thinking, well, hang on, I can't keep who I've got, let alone bring anyone in. So maybe he's got, we should probably give him a bit more respect than we first did in the fact that he actually has got some resolution about him.
Yeah, and I'll certainly put my hand up that when he was first linked in the press, when Slutsky was sort of on his last legs, that I was very adamantly opposed to Adkins because he just um, one of the few things that I did quite like about Ehab, Alam, was his strategy in appointing managers, at least up to that point, in his own words, was that he didn't want to dip on that managerial merry-go-round that happens in England, where you've got your Allardyces, your Pardew's, your whoever it might be, the sort of older brigade of managers that have washed up from one job to the next, Moyes, Pulis, those sorts of guys. And he was going for the more young, exciting, the Marco Silvas, the Leonid Slutskys, to sort of try something new and sort of have a gamble at it. So when Adkins was linked, it seemed as if he was sort of moving back into that managerial merry-go-round, looking for that older, more experienced English manager, and I was very against it initially. And the form at the start when he came in wasn't amazing, but as you said, I mean, he was in charge for 18 months, and really the form that we displayed from, I guess, about 2 or 3 months into the season just finished was remarkable. And when really, I think at one point we were the form team of the league. We were, in the top two for form teams, and really, if we'd started that form any earlier, we would have been a guarantee of a playoff place, if not higher in the table.
Yeah, and look, that's pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? If it's all about earlier, if we start pre-season with an extra player or two,
Correct. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever it
And
may
that's it.
be, and this is still the problem that the slow learners who own the club still don't get, is that Brucey left whenever that was now, 16 or 17. He left because the resources aren't there, and every manager since then has found out the same way. Other than Slutsky, who pretty much had to fall on his sword because we were terrible. But every manager along that way has all found the same problem. We're just under resourced, and if you're going to run a shoestring, you're going to end up running a shoestring, aren't you?
Yeah, someone posted on Twitter, and we'll talk about the incoming manager in a second, but someone posted on Twitter following McCann's comments around hoping to get his transfers done early. Similar comments from Adkins, from Slutsky, from Phelan from the previous summers, which all didn't eventuate. Even, Adkins, the January just gone, where he was sort of talking about some sort of moves being made to really shore up a push for the playoffs, which again didn't really eventuate. We had Ridgeville come in, but that was it. So it is frustrating. We have made one signing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't really expect anyone to have come in yet, and we've got another player training with the club in Maribela. But other than that, it's a bit bleak on the transfers front. But at least on the managerial front, we have had the new manager appointed, Grant McCann, coming from Doncaster. A little bit surprised that we paid compensation for him. I really thought we were going to go for an out of work manager. It seemed where they can avoid it, the owners would be looking to just find someone on the cheap. So that was a little surprising to me. But he's a young manager, so he's sort of bucked that trend that Adkins represented of the older sort, the older guard, back to that younger, more exciting, more adventurous sort of roll of the dice in terms of the managerial stakes. Knows how to work on a really tight budget. Got Doncaster to the playoffs last season when no one really expected that from them, and did pretty well with Peterborough before that. He presents quite an interesting sort of prospect as the manager.
Look, he does. He probably. I mean, we just don't know, do we? I mean, probably the only thing that seems to be apparent from those that know a little bit about Doncaster's run is that he did galvanise the players and got them on that common path, and that's probably what we do need right now. But having said that, I mean, these guys are all professional. They're already getting paid, already doing hard yards before he's even walked in. So you're just hoping that probably he's got enough authority to actually run the place.
Yeah.
And this is probably still the problem. And you'd know yourself, Alex, in talking to certain people at certain times, that if you're a player at that club, you're not really sure what's happening within the year, let alone at the end of each year. So hopefully he's the one that can put all the BS aside and use that sort of hard-nosed Northern Ireland approach, so to speak, to get these guys really playing the same way and for the same cause.
Well, yeah, and it'll certainly be interesting because from the sounds of things, he's a rather attacking manager, and I think it means that it could be a repeat of the Slutsky era of big sort of score lines, and either, you know, a 5-4 win or a 4-3 win or a, 4-0 loss or something like that. I guess the concern is as well that we've been linked with a lot of players that he had at Doncaster, so we'll talk in a minute about Malik Wilkes going to Barnsley instead of signing for us. But we've also got Ryan Tafazoli, I believe is how it's pronounced, training with us at the moment, former player at Peterborough. Um, there's a little bit of a concern that the owners probably look at this as quite an attractive way to sign players. They're a bit cheap. They're from League One. They're going to be quite eager to join a championship club. But the other side of that is if they don't have any championship experience, they could be found out quite quickly. And you're building a League One squad. There's only one place you'll end up.
Look, exactly. I don't mind the idea, especially knowing the manager that we've now got, to bring in the sort of League One options if we're getting those, again, that hard-nosed type approach, that he gets to pick the players that he thinks have got that. And I don't think the difference between League One and Championship is probably as big on the defensive front, but I think more on the attacking front. So I think it gets back to how well we can hold some of the players that we've got in the forward half, considering Campbell's already gone, and looking at the lineup for tonight or tomorrow morning, whichever way you call it. I think we've got Dicko's the only recognised striker on the sheet. Is that we've seen players, from many different walks of life in the past, even going back to, George Boyd surprising the hell out of us at different times and things like that. I don't think that the difference between League One and Championship is as great that you've got a fear of bringing players up a league. But I do think that unless we're getting someone in that forward half who's proven to be able to do the job, then that's probably where we'll have the problems.
Yeah, I think that's the concern at the moment is that lack of attacking options. I guess the club might be operating on the theory that until Bowen or Grzycki go, we operate on the assumption that we can hold on to them and we start to sort of make serious moves if or when they go. For instance, we don't know how much we might be able to get for Bowen, so therefore that could shape or change our strategy around a replacement. Grzycki seems quite settled. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the messages that he's been leaving on Milinkovic's Instagram, to sort of say, got a new manager, you got to come back and do a job for us, we need you in the team, all that sort of thing. Doesn't sound like a guy that's about to walk out the door. So he may very well be sticking around at least until January.
Yeah, look, I don't know what Grzycki's contract
I
actually
think
looks like,
I
but
think this is his last year.
right, okay. So I mean, really, we know that he wasn't happy last year. We would assume that, obviously, by the way he played.
Yeah, he seemed to sort of settle in from about the halfway point.
I think maybe Adkins might have had something to do with that. Just, I don't know, maybe that bit of galvanising at the right time. But really, Grzycki at times has sort of showed that, look, he wants to go, he doesn't want to go. I think he's probably just thought with the fact now that, look, he's playing good football, he's on a contract till another year, I think you said. He's probably just going to see how that goes. And at the moment, every time it's gone close for him moving, it's never come through. So there's obviously
Yeah.
a good reason for that. And maybe it all points back to the same top of the pyramid where the owners are pulling the strings, and if it comes to negotiations, they're just going to keep trying to bleed whatever they can out of any deal, and clubs will turn away.
Yeah, although I like to have faith in the fact that I suspect that the owners are probably pretty keen to get. He's probably our last big wage earner on the books. I suspect they're pretty keen to get him out. So I like to hold faith that perhaps he's a bit of a rascal character. He's had his moments on social media which have made people sort of chuckle in amazement or confusion at him, but. I wonder if there's a part of him that's sort of saying, oh, well, I know what the fans' opinion of the owners are, and I've got a contract here, so I know they want to get rid of me. I'm just going to stay and
Yeah.
sort of, piss off the owners, which will help, make the fans happy. But
No, that wouldn't
who knows?
surprise me either.
He's a funny one. But on players that have left, two big names departed at the end of their contracts last month or at the start of this month, without any fanfare from the club, which was a little bit surprising, at least for Fraizer Campbell, who had a pretty big role in two different eras at the club. Obviously, back in 2008, the assister for Dean Windas's winner at Wembley, and a huge part of that season with his goals. And then returning to the club over the last two seasons and weighing in with some pretty important goals. Until Bowen got going last season, he was really our only goal scoring option for a fair chunk of the season. And even when Bowen started scoring, you get those sort of lulls in games where we'd win 1-0 or something and it'd be Campbell who's popped up with a goal. I think it was Bolton that really kick-started our winning run or our surge in form, where I think it was a Campbell goal in that game. So he weighed in with a lot of important goals, and I was a bit disappointed with the way that the club's farewelled him or hasn't farewelled him.
No, look, I agree. I think we've all loved him and hated him at times, especially when he was at Cardiff. But
Yeah,
when he
exactly.
came back, the thing that probably impressed me the most, and even probably I didn't give him as much credit 10, 12 years ago when we won that promotion year, is that he worked his ass off last year, and there was times where even if he came on for a 20-minute sub, he changed the way we played at times. And even him not scoring, I still think there was games last year where we looked, a 30-40% better side when he came on, um, just because of his work ethic. And if you go back through the highlights of last year, how many times was he annoying keepers
Mm.
and last defenders and all that sort of stuff? So not to mention, I don't know how many he scored last year, but I think he's still got to be running in sort of 1 in 3 games or 1 in 4 games over the last season and a half anyway. Um, yeah, look, it pretty much sums it up, mate. I'm amazed that the club didn't have some sort of hoo-ha to say goodbye to him, because it probably shows where that history of the club's just been turned over. Um, with all the name change and all that sort of stuff, it's almost like, in the last 7 or 8, 9 years now, whatever it's been, that we just focus too much on this era and not what's gone on before. And it doesn't surprise me, I suppose. Not being negative all the time on the owners, but I'm going to be. Um, he's a
Yeah, it
legend of
has
the
sort of turned
club,
into that, hasn't it?
really.
We haven't really meant it to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a legend of the
Yeah.
club, whichever way you look at it. I mean,
Yeah, and that's
the
it. And
fact
it,
he even came back after
yeah.
we booed him off the park a few times, and I'm sure he had other offers going when he first joined us, but he probably felt like he had a bit unfinished business, and I thought he was really good.
Yeah, and it is kind of crazy when you think that that 2008 promotion feels so long ago, but he was sort of that connective tissue between those two eras where you think the 08, 09 team squad that we took into the Premier League that was sort of largely part to his work in 07, 08. Um, and then you look ahead and it's, yeah, been 10 years exactly since that 08, 09 Premiership campaign. Um, that he's now back in the team. So sort of, I guess, what, 10 years between appearances for us. And it's completely different eras of the club, and he's sort of that connective tissue between the old and the new. And it was a really important role that he played in completely different ways. I mean, in 07, 08, he was sort of that young, pacey striker playing off Dino. And in 17, 18, and then 18, 19, he was that older sort of target man sort of role, as you said, working his socks off, running the channels and making a nuisance of himself. But he was that sort of older striker with Bowen and Grzycki playing off him. So it was sort of a role reversal, and it's a sign of the times, I guess. But it's a important sort of part of our club history, and as you say, a club legend. So very disappointing, and who knows? I mean, Marshall's departure was only announced when he signed with Wigan, so potentially when Campbell signs for his next club, that might be when we get it.
Look, maybe, and probably, I don't know. The use of the word legends is interesting, and I still think he was. He was so important to that year that gave the club a whole new platform.
Well, he sparked
That
it all, didn't he? Because we were sort of
he did. Oh yeah,
trudging along, and then he came
yeah.
in and off it went.
And I mean, you look at that side in that year, we had goal scorers, but I can't remember how many he scored, but I think he must have
I
scored
think it
at
was,
least 15
yeah, I think it was 19. I could be wrong on that,
there.
but
So, and look at what happened last year with Bowen scoring what he did. I'd say Campbell must have at least scored 10
yeah,
last season.
I'll pull that up.
So you know that's probably the thing that we're talking about originally. You want to try and do something in this league this year. You need someone who's going to bang in 10 plus goals. Well, we've
Sorry,
just got rid of one.
yeah, you're right. So it's 15 in that first season, and then 12 last year. So
There you go. So 12.
he went from 6 in 36 in his first season back with us in 17-18 to 12 in
Yeah,
39 last year. So he actually picked up his output last year.
yeah, and I think he, just from an observation perspective, I think he really knew that he had to put it in last year, and he looked leaner. He looked like he was
Fitter,
fitter. He was
absolutely,
doing
yeah.
everything he can. And I mean, going into this year, I don't think he's that old that
No,
we
he's
can't be
not.
sort of throwing a good contract at a guy who's just scored 12, 12 goals. I think he said in a second,
Yeah.
second striker role. I mean, that's what we need to get up.
So he's 31, but that's young enough that you could offer him a 2-year contract with an option for a third, to see how it
Yeah,
goes. It's not, he's not 35, 36 and past it. He's still very much, I mean, not in his prime, but he's not an old man either. Um, The interesting one, which is sort of relevant from our side of things, is he's been linked in recent days or recent weeks with the Western Sydney Wanderers, with Jackson Irvine supposedly putting a good word in for the Aussie club. So it'd be very interesting if he follows in the footsteps of Garcia, who played in the A League, Robbie Corrin played in the A League, Allsop played in the A League. So there's a few ex-City players who've had a go down here. It'd be very interesting if another of the class of '08 came down and had a go at it.
Well, the good thing is we'd be able to actually ask him exactly what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see indeed. And then as we sort of touched on, the other departure was David Marshall, who, um, much like Adkins, got to put the hand up and say, I got it wrong on him. Initially he had a very rocky start to his City career, but boy, last season he really turned that around and 11 clean sheets in the competition, considering what our defence was like at times. Very, very impressive return for him, and I guess he kind of goes out with his head held high.
Yeah, look, he was pretty good, and I think look when he was at Cardiff, I remember when he first joined us, Cardiff were really upset that he left, or the fans
Yeah,
were, and how much they rated him. So he obviously had it in him, and I can't remember how much we paid for him originally, but it wasn't cheap. So
a feeling it
you know,
was maybe 5 million. Like I've kind of
yeah,
pulled that out of nowhere, but I'm not sure.
yeah. So I mean, I know that's when Brucey probably had a little bit of money, but paying
Well, it
five
was right
million for a
after
keeper at
Bruce.
that
Well,
stage, we
I think we were linked to him with Bruce, but it was really Phelan who brought him in, I think. So I don't know if it was sort of
did he?
Bruce might
Oh,
have
okay,
said, yeah, because it was that Premier League season where we got Marshall, we got Henriksen. It was a very odd window when you look at who he signed. It was Marshall, Henriksen, Keane, and Weir, and then who else did we sign? It was bizarre because we just didn't sign. When you look back at it, there was just no. Oh, and Mason. Mason was the big one. But
right.
yeah, it was not a fantastic window, I must say.
Yeah, well, I think at the time
Yeah,
they,
deal for
yeah,
five
like I
million.
said, their supporters were a bit upset. So he obviously had it in him, but when he finally got to string a few together, and obviously the defence did get a lot more resolute last year at times, and really probably he felt probably like he was really dictating terms a bit. There were some games there where he looked like he was, the best keeper in England on certain days. But yeah, shame to see him go. But again, you would assume that if we paid 5 million for him or 6 million for him and we bought him, his wages would have been high. There was no way they were ever going to continue that wage bill the way it is, especially with all the parachutes now jumped off. So
Interesting that he's
had to
signed for
go.
Wigan. Interesting that he's signed for Wigan though. I don't know what
Yeah.
that
Well,
necessarily says.
no, well, I can't say it's aspirational, but
Because he
the
was
one
linked to
thing is,
Celtic for a time.
yeah, and I think probably what happens, mate, is these guys, as a guess, because we don't know, obviously, but I think what happens is there's that much speculation. He's going to be number two at Liverpool one day, and then he's going to be
Yeah,
this, that,
that's
and the
right.
other. That
That's right.
you probably just literally get an offer that looks like it's concrete and it's good for you for a period of time, and you think that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
And he was probably literally running out of time to get a decent deal out of somewhere, considering no one had come by now.
Yeah. That's right. I completely forgot he was linked to Liverpool for a little while as a new number two for them, but it would have been a very interesting move if that one had eventuated. Um,
It might
yeah,
have been
so
his agent that leaked that one, mate.
yeah, yeah, wishful thinking perhaps for them. In terms of one keeper left the club, and we have already moved and signed a new keeper with Matt Ingram coming in from QPR. Um, Not a highly rated keeper, if I must be honest, from what I've seen or read from QPR fans and others who've sort of seen him play. But I suspect he's been. So I suspect at least initially he's being brought in as a number two to Long to see which of them can stake a claim for the number one. Guess we'll see what happens over preseason, which one impresses more as to see which one starts in goal at the start of the season. But you know, it is a bit hard to see when we've got guys like Manny in the reserves, who from everything I've heard is really highly rated, looks really good. Maybe the club thinks he's just a little bit too young to get thrown in as a keeper, as a reserve keeper, or as a starting keeper at points in the season, and they thought we needed an extra senior body. And I guess as a third string keeper or second string keeper at QPR, Ingram would have come pretty cheap.
But probably, obviously, you would assume that someone's been scouting him for a while or got a pretty good dossier on him, and whether he fits in as number 2 or number 3 or even potentially rivaling George for number 1, we probably won't know until after we've seen a few games come together. But he seems to come sort of reasonably highly regarded, even though he was the third choice keeper at QPR. I think it was someone mentioned something on one of the forums that he was still rated as technically one of QPR's best on the
Right.
technical front. So that's good. But I mean, then again, I think with keepers these days as well, they train them so well. It's all about their mentality and how they dig in at the back and run things on match day. And you just hope that he's had a little bit of presence at another club and can push on with it. I don't know what our friend Jakupovic's doing, but
Well, yeah, I
I'm
don't know if you
sure his
saw
wages wouldn't
yeah.
be cheap enough at the moment.
I don't know if you saw the message from Jakupovic a month or so ago where City fan had messaged him to sort of say, oh, come home, we all love you. And he said something to the effect of, he'd love to come back. And, as
Oh,
you
wow.
say, it is probably a bit of the wages and that, and of course he might be just saying that sort of thing to appease the fans or whatever it is. But, it is nice to see some of those players. And I must say at this point as well, and I tweeted out today about it, but having just finished Richard Gardam's The Decade, which was a fantastic read, it is really great to read how many players, whether they're British players or even foreign players, really take to the city and really take to the people of Hull, and
Mm,
genuinely really love the club for that reason, and actually genuinely are quite happy to come back. And it's interesting weighing that up against potentially the international perception of Hull as a sort of a crap sort of city to live in. That actually a lot of the players really love it and really love the culture and the people and everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jakupovic was happy to come back.
Oh, look, wouldn't surprise me. And probably that's to answer your question about Ingram signing. I sort of felt like if we've got, let's say, 2 first team keepers or thereabouts, wouldn't it be worth seeing what we could do in the loan market to try and get someone in? That way your long term commitment to your wages isn't there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many games Jakupovic just played at Leicester, but it wouldn't be more than a handful
No.
that
I
I've
think
heard
he's
of.
been more
So,
sort of League Cup and that sort of thing.
yeah. So, without knowing where he is in the pecking order there, running with George and Mannion as your staples and then trying to bring someone in wouldn't have hurt. But then again, we don't run the clubs, so we just sit back and observe.
Another player who looks like he's about to sign on the dotted line for City is Ryan Tafazoli, who's training with the club at the moment over in Mirabella. Played for McCann at Peterborough, 250 appearances in League One, was a Southampton Academy player, and we know they've got a pretty decent academy, so he's cut from a pretty decent cloth. Hasn't played in the Championship before, but I suspect if he comes in, it'll be as a sort of a depth player behind Device and Burke. And looks like a pretty decent one. 27, so sort of at that, peak of his career, good time, sweet spot in his career to come in as a centre back and have a couple of decent years of service.
Yeah, look, and so is he part of sort of McGann's network?
I
Is
wonder,
that
well, potentially, but he played for him at Peterborough, but he didn't play for him at Doncaster, so he's not the sort of player who has sort of followed him around, so to speak, but clearly one that McGann rates and was happy to try and bring back.
yeah? And I mean, look, we need the cover. So I think if he's played 250 games, and I mean, the only concern probably is if he was that good, Peterborough would have fought heaven and earth to keep him.
Yeah.
And that's still the only thing that worries me is are we
Well,
getting?
yeah, it'll be interesting to see if
Mm,
if he sort of wanted to challenge himself at a higher level, and so didn't sign a new deal, and that's the reason he's out of contract and free agent, or
yeah,
as you say, whether there's something else going on there, and there's a reason why Peterborough didn't re-sign him.
yeah. Look, could be. And again, it's one of those things where it's just rumours and so on. We don't know. I think the only thing I did see when we're looking through this was that there was another club trying to lure him away. And it wasn't, I can't remember who it was, mate, but it wasn't someone small.
No.
It was certainly someone championship um, size or stature. So that's obviously, he's on someone else's radar as well, which adds a little bit of weight to it.
Yeah. Well, another player who was lured away was Malik Wilkes. We were sort of in talks with him, so to speak. And look, I sort of treat a lot of the reporting around this with a healthy dose of skepticism. As soon as I see the figure 1.2 million being mentioned as a fee that we had accepted for him, I can't help but roll my eyes a little bit. And I've seen a few people sort of suggest that the owners might have had a good sense of what wage he was willing to accept, and knowing that we weren't going to be able to match even Barnsley's offer, which is a little bit galling when you consider that they might have let the reports go out that we'd had a 1.2 million bid when they knew themselves there was no danger that we'd actually be paying it. Shows the fans with splashing a bit of money without actually splashing any money, and sort of tries to appease them. But I'm a bit cynical on all of that, and it's a in a way it's a frustrating one to miss out on, because he's another who McCann had at Doncaster, had a really good spell. But reading into him, he's meant to be in court for some assault charge or something like that. He was not sort of pulling up trees at Leeds or doing anything in the championship. They were quite happy to let him go. Um, might have been one with an attitude problem, which isn't really what you want in this sort of squad. In a squad that's going to be potentially fighting a relegation battle, you want players that are going to be pulling in the same direction and sort of focused on staying up. And Tafazoli, in a lot of ways, as a League One player, is actually sort of the player you do want, as you said before, in terms of defensive players at least, where they've got that grit and
Mm.
determination. Yeah, you want more flashy, high-scoring attacking options, but this kid potentially didn't sound like he would have fit the bill.
Look, yeah, and it's hard because, again, we don't get to watch him enough, and our friends in the UK would probably know a lot more about him than maybe we get to see here. But he certainly did do a job at Doncaster, which makes you think, okay, that's worth a look. But I think your skepticism there on what was being thrown around as dollars and cents goes, look, let's face it, if we're going to pay 1 point something million for this
Correct.
guy, well, you roll that into Campbell's contract.
Yeah,
That's when
correct.
it's
Correct.
just a no-brainer. So I think you nailed it, mate. That he's worth more. It was never going to happen. So we'll make it look like we're doing something. You would think the link with McCann was strong enough that would be enough to get over a little bit of wage difference if there was any, or was going to be any. But clearly, the deal was never going to get done at that level anyway.
Mm.
So, and that's the frustrating thing, mate. These guys make these decisions, but I'm sure if you have offered Campbell another million over the next year and a half, he stays.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's I
hmm.
struggle to get my head around, and I've said it I don't know how many times, and I'm sure the listeners get sick of hearing me say it. I just don't understand why we let the contracts run down to the point that they do, and we let these players leave on freeze, where surely the cost of giving them another year or two of wages is so much less than the cost of potentially paying a transfer fee and bringing in a new player who you don't have any confidence. You can't say for certain that they're going to settle in and have the same impact. You know what Campbell's going to bring to the table. You know he's good for, call it, between 8 to 12 goals in the season. How are you going to get a player that's potentially going to do the same thing for, as you say, a million and a half over 2 years? If
Yeah.
that, I don't even know what he would have been asking for as a wage.
Oh,
If he's
who
potentially
knows, mate?
joining Western Sydney, he can't be asking for too much.
Well, look, I mean, and this is the thing, it's still the cost of doing business, isn't it? I mean, here's a guy that we know what we've got, we know his attitude, we know everything about him, and he fits the bill. And yet we'll go and chase someone 10, 12 years younger, who's untried at this level, who's got a bit of grey area around his personality, who can't get a game at his regular club in the championship. Um, and yet we'll throw money at that. And that's why I think you're right, mate. I think there's just smoke and mirrors, and the money's just not there. That's
I
the bottom line.
Yeah, and I can see the idea of bringing in younger players, and like I think it's sort of what we looked at doing last summer with Device and Burke coming in, and I think I absolutely support the idea of bringing in those younger players with that sell-on value, the potential that they'll grow into the role, into the club. Kevin Stewart was another one which his, jury's potentially still out on him, but he certainly looks to have turned it around. But you bring them in to supplement what you've got, not to replace what you've got. I know with
Yeah,
Burke and
that's it.
Device we sort of had to because Dawson had gone, Davies had gone, um, top
Oh, there was a
try,
massive hole. We had to
Hector had
fill it. You're
gone.
right.
Yeah. But where you can try to avoid it, you bring them in to supplement what you've got, and they can grow with the players around them rather than throw them to the wolves.
Yeah, yeah, and I think as well, probably the pedigree comes through a little bit. Like, I mean, even just when you're mentioning Kevin Stewart, um, what a waste of space we thought he was at times. Um, but to his credit, I mean, he was brilliant last year. But he has got some pedigree. I know he didn't do a lot at these clubs, but he was at Premier League clubs,
Yeah.
and not just average ones either. And playing regular, at least reserve team football, which you would assume would put you on par with most Championship League One clubs. So I think the problem you've got with some of these decisions is that you can't just sort of say, look, we're going to chase new players or we're going to bring in youth or we're going to supplement what we've got when we haven't actually got a lot. And the concern, again, this is year 4 in a row now. We're starting pre-season with not even enough first-team players to fill a team sheet.
Well,
And
yeah.
that's where the problem lies. Like you said at the start of tonight's podcast, mate, a couple of early wins last year, and we're in the top 6, and we're probably going to Wembley at worst. Um, but when you start pre-season again with the whole, famous Curtis Davies photo situation, what are you going to do? You're weeks and weeks behind other clubs who are, some clubs are running with 40, 50 first-team training at this point of the season. They're culling blokes
Yeah.
left, right, and centre. And here we are bringing a couple of guys in from lower leagues to supplement a first team that's just hasn't got enough cattle.
Well, yeah, so speaking of games and lineups, we do have Leighton Orient tomorrow morning, which has prompted the first episode of the season for us. Um, Leighton Orient had the really unfortunate circumstance of their manager passing away over the summer just after the season finished. So I think I saw that the club is going to sort of recognise that in some way before the game or during the game, which is really good to see. Um, in terms of the on the pitch, players look like a lot of the academy players are going to get a go. And in particular, I think Keen Lewis Potter's the one that I'm really keen to keep an eye out for because as much as we talk about the lack of attacking options, and I think it's probably too early for him, he was lighting up the under 23s last season, and um, I pull back a little bit from saying it's too early for him because I think we were all saying the same thing of one Jared Bowen 2 years ago, and he lit up preseason, and we thought, well, preseason's one thing, doing it in the season's another, and he'll probably take another year or two, and he just took to the championship like a duck to water. So, um, Lewis Potter, who knows if lightning strikes twice, and he's the new Jared Bowen, and he can sort of answer all our problems from out of nowhere, really. But yeah, he's certainly the one I've got an eye on for tonight.
Yeah, and I do remember when he first got signed up on his current contract. I remember Adkins did really talk him up, and um, I think he's obviously got enough in him to really make a. I don't know if he's Bowen-esque, but um, Adkins really did. I remember at the time thinking, right, this kid must have something because Adkins was really glowing of him. So fingers crossed. I mean, but then again, he's only, I think
I
is he
think he's only
just turned
18 or
18
19.
or
Yeah, he's
he's
very
only
young.
17? Yeah, so he's worth pursuing, that's for sure, and seeing what we can get out of him while we certainly need to supplement what we've got.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you? Pre-season games are always interesting because there's that part of you that's sort of the instinct is, you want to see a win, you want to do well, but at the end of the day, the more pragmatic side is, well, the win isn't as important as sort of seeing how players go. Usually, you'd be looking for new signings to see how they bed in. We don't really have that unless this Tafazoli plays and Ingram potentially, I suspect, will play a part, whether it's, for a half or whatever it is, see how those guys bed in, see how the players sort of come back for the start of preseason. I suspect guys like Burke and I think Lehigh is going to be involved as well. Grzycki and Henriksen only have just joined the squad, so they're probably not going to get involved. Whether whether Milinkovic gets a run out and he can kind of have a go at trying to impress McCann, because he's one of those guys where he didn't really play at all last season. So, to use that famous sort of expression, he'd be like a new signing if he comes in and can do a job. He suddenly answers at least half of the question of who replaces Grzycki and Bowen. So he's a really interesting one as well to keep an eye on.
Yeah, look, I think in this case, mate, we just want them all to get through fit and just try and have a new hit out with the manager. He's probably obviously got a much different game style plan to what Adkins had, so there'll be a lot of adjustments that need to be made and all those sorts of things. But really, optimistically, we get some goals. That'll be the number one. And number two, yeah, just everyone stays fit.
Fair enough. And then I guess last thing before we go, what have you made of the new City kits? We've had the home kit released for a couple of weeks now, and then the away kit was released today. I really like that home kit. I think my only criticism, my only comment on it would be it'd be good if the stripes or what would you call it, the claw marks or whatever it is, if they extended onto the sleeves. It feels that they're a little bit sort of stuck on and not they don't kind of fully extend all the way across the kit. But other than that, I think it's a really unique look. It's a really fun sort of callback to that 90s kit. And it's, yeah, something a little bit different.
Yeah, I hate to disagree with you, mate. I can't stand it. I really
Yeah,
can't. The
it's
thought of those
it's a
stripes
very
again just brings up bad memories. And I still think of, for me, when the kits come out, it's always, well, now that the logo's changed, I would consider buying it. But I always look at these kits and go, would I buy it? And that one is a definite not. I'm just
fair enough.
not interested in those stripes. But on the flip side, the away strip, I dig. It's really good.
Yeah, it's nice and clean and simple. I like the black trimming on it as well. I think they're almost going for a complete echo of that season in the 90s, because I have a feeling that away kit that year was a white kit with black trimming as well. But yeah, on the home kit, I know it's very divisive. I know people I've spoken to either love it or hate it. It's a really interesting one how it can sort of split people so much. But it'll certainly get a bit of comments and get people talking, I suspect, as we start to see it in action. But I think my sense is, given the fact that we've announced the away kit today, that's what we'll be running out in tonight. And I guess we'll see how the boys go tonight. So thank you
Yeah,
so
and look, the
much.
last
Yep.
white kit that we had was that 2008 white kit when we got promoted. That away kit was a
Well, that's good
ripper.
omens. Yeah.
So fingers crossed we win a lot of games on the road.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed indeed. But until the season starts, or until I guess the next preseason game, we'll sign off at that point. So thanks for joining me, Brad.
Yeah, cheers for having me, mate.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. We'll be back with more City news and City discussion after this preseason friendly, and looking ahead to the next one. So until then, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
Going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.